I remember the night like a photograph smeared with tears and cheap perfume, my older sister Vanessa, in a sequined gown that caught the camera flashes like a trap, smiling with the practiced proprietary smile she'd learned a world that loved her. Fundraisers, art openings, the corridors of power where a name and address could open doors. She had invited me, an oddly generous, brittle thing for someone who had cut me loose so often, to a nice dinner at the Langham, promising after dinner wine and a chance to meet people who could help me. I believed her because she was my sister, because I carried some childish hope that family could be an antidote to the slow ache I'd lived with since childhood. Instead, she led me through the marble lobby with my hands in the pockets of my thrift store coat and sat me down at a small round table by the waitstaff door while she glided toward a long table glittering with faces I recognized from glossy magazines. Judges, trustees, the kind of people whose names were printed on canvases and plaques. They laughed the right laughs and drank the right wines. And my plate, when it came, was small and artful and cold. Vanessa's table was loud and warm and ablaze with candles, a constellation in which she was the sun. The separation wasn't a misunderstanding or a social faux pas. No, it was deliberate, theatrical, designed to send a message she must have been polishing for months. You are not one of us. The wordless humiliation of being escorted to a separate table under the very chandelier, where her friends smiled their approval, was a blow I had no language for in the moment. I felt small, like a property placed in the corner of a painting. People glanced. A man I'd once loved, now a neighbor in another life, caught my eye and looked away as though the sight of me was an inconvenient tidal wave. Vanessa caught that look and smiled sharper like a blade of light. I left the dinner midway through, my throat thick with coffee and shame, and made myself small in the rain because the humiliation had lodged itself somewhere behind my ribs, like a live coal. For weeks the scene replayed in me, not as memory but as a drumbeat. Vanessa's invitation, my seating, the clink of glasses, the low laughter that had nothing to do with me. For someone else it might have been a single cruelty. For me it was a key turn in a door that had been closed my entire life. We had been two daughters born into a household with a father who measured love in ledgers and a mother who measured worth in social proof. Vanessa had learned how to translate his attention into currency. She was impeccable at the signals, the right internships, the right friends, the right apathetic charm. I learned the opposite: silence, survival, the long, quiet accumulation of small humiliations. Yet that night, sitting alone under the waitstaff's footfall, something inside me did not break. It hardened, not granite, something more patient and precise, like ice forming around an object clear and inexorable. I began my revenge in the most ordinary and least cinematic way possible. I rebuilt myself. The world Vanessa inhabited, boards, gala lists, donor circulations, was a geography I did not yet know how to navigate. So I learned. I studied her pattern. I watched from the edges the way she built alliances, not through loyalty but strategic generosity, gifts with clauses, mentorships that were mortgages. She collected people the way some collect art because of their value to her reputation. I took notes on who mattered to her. I volunteered at the small nonprofit where one of her trustees sat on the advisory council. I took a job in a research lab, worked my way from coffee runs to grant writing to presentations. Each small victory stitched new confidence where the old had been torn. But revenge is rarely a single act. It is a story that requires an arc, characters, and a stage. So I built a stage. She accused me in private conversations of trespassing, of betrayal, and in public she mastered a performance of wounded composure that won her some sympathy. Yet the board asked for her resignation not as punishment but as a necessary step for transparency. A few donors withdrew their major gifts. Her relationship with one billionaire patron cooled. Social calendars rearranged themselves politely around the scandal. Vanessa, trained to be the social sun, found herself dimmed in a way that made her stumble. People who had once smoothed her way kept their distance. Watching her life recalibrate under the pressure of lost status felt like watching a cultivated garden after a sudden frost. Orderly but devastated. And yet the true pivot, the one I had not anticipated when I poured my hurt into a plan, came when the man who had been my nearest friend during all of this, Daniel, told me something that reframed everything. Daniel had been a friend to both of us. He had watched from the sidelines as we volleyed our small cruelties. He told me quietly that in the months before the Langham dinner, Vanessa had been terrified in a way that looked, from the outside, like cruel. Her father had suffered a stroke. The family business had teetered. She had been trying to short up to keep an old house of cards from crashing, and in her panic she had chosen strategies that were corruptible and cruel. He told me this not to absolve her, but to explain the human fulcrum that had made her cruelty possible. I felt the old coal in me shift, but it did not go cold. It became, instead, more like tempered steel, ready for impact but precise. The next phase of my revenge was quieter. Instead of shaming her publicly further, I leveraged the evidence to negotiate accountability and restitution. I pushed for reforms at the foundation that would prevent future misallocations. Clear audit structures, community representation on the board, transparent report. I insisted fiercely and without malice that donors' funds be returned to their intended purposes. Vanessa watched me with an expression I could not read. Admiration, resentment, something that was perhaps closer to the respect one feels toward an opponent who knows the rules of the game. The board begrudgingly accepted some of my proposals. Vanessa resigned. Her resignation letter was polished and heartbreaking, full of the language of regret and the careful parsing of culpability. After that, the public storm calmed. Vanessa retreated from high society functions and rebuilt a smaller life, less gilded perhaps, but steadier. She started offering small grants to community initiatives, this time under the scrutiny of people who insisted on accountability. She went to therapy. She wrote an op-ed about the dangers of performative philanthropy and named her failings, a gesture that cost her dearly in private reputation, but perhaps less in personal integrity. She apologized to people she had hurt, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with the clear weight of someone finally feeling the depth of their actions. My revenge in many ways had worked, but it had also transformed into something else. I got a job that suited me, writing grants that helped small organizations thrive. The humiliation of the Langham dinner remained, a scar that taught me where my soft places were, but it no longer defined me. Vanessa and I, after months of terse emails and awkward family gatherings, sat across from each other at a diner in Queens with coffee steaming between us. We traded memories like bartered goods, nullifying, accounting, and finally, the small acts of confession that lubricate reconciliation. She spoke of the pressure she had felt, of the father who had taught her to value appearances over substance, of the loneliness that had convinced her that if she could not be adored, she could at least be feared. I told her about the nights I had eaten cereal at midnight, teaching myself new skills, learning to love work that had no gala attached to it. We did not forgive each other in a movie moment of soaring music. We agreed to try. That perhaps was the most surprising mercy. Of course, not all revenge stories end in a hand offered across a diner table. There were people who never forgave her. There were donors who left the city with a net worth and a sense that charity had grown too complicated. There were those who said I had no right to bring her down, that blood meant something in their strange moral calculus, that family ties should have dissuaded me. For them, I had a simple answer. Family does not grant impunity. If love is real, it withstands truth as well as praise. There were nights I lay awake and asked myself whether I had been cruel in my own ways, whether my patient, moralizing triumph had not been, in some places, its own variant of power. The answer was messy. I had not driven her to ruin. I had compelled accountability. Still, the human heart contains rooms that only time and humility can repaint. Years later, at a small community center that had been saved because of stricter grant oversight and a cadre of vigilant donors, I gave a short speech about stewardship. Vanessa was there, sitting near the back, not presenting or presiding, but listening. Afterward, she came up to me and placed a hand on my arm in a gesture that was both tentative and warm. "You were right," she said with the plainness of someone who had worn too many masks and was learning to carry a single truth. "And I was wrong. There was no spectacle to it, no dramatic reconciliation, no admission that would absolve us both of our pasts. Just two sisters, older now in a way that made age look less like a tally of years and more like a series of small repairs. If there is a moral here, it is not a neat one. Revenge had begun as a hunger to be seen, to correct the ledger that had always shown me as a deficit. It became unexpectedly a route to reform. It taught me that power could be redirected toward justice and that public shaming, when tethered to evidence and aimed at systemic change, could be a tool rather than a cruelty. But it also taught me humility, that people who hurt others can be both captors and captives of their own fear, that my victory would never be wholly satisfying if it left us both hollow. I carried the Langham dinner like a fossilized relic for a long time, proof that the world could be cruel and that I could respond. But in the end, the most radical thing I discovered was this: the capacity to hold someone accountable and still leave room for their repair is not weakness. It is an invitation to build something durable out of what once seemed irreparable. And sometimes on late afternoons when light falls in the window just so and a neighbor's child runs in the hallway with the unself-conscious joy of people who have not yet learned to market themselves, I think of that night under the chandelier, and I smile, not because the humiliation was funny, but because I survived it, and because the survival did not ask me to become the person who had hurt me. Vanessa and I still have arguments that flare like matches. We still keep distance when the old scripts begin to lure us back into roles we played poorly. But we also host small dinners, not at the Langham but at a long table in my apartment where neighbors, colleagues, and community leaders laugh without the surveillance of a camera, and where the seats are arranged by invitation, not hierarchy. Once, someone asked why I bothered to invite Vanessa at all, knowing the history, and I said simply, because the world is large enough for both consequence and mercy. She listened, then smiled, and I thought of how odd it was that revenge, when it matured into stewardship, could look a lot like forgiveness, tempered by truth.